A little context. Until this last year, I had a cat named Murray. He came to live with us in 2007 and died earlier this year. He was anywhere from 19 to 22 years old. Murray was a prolific mouse hunter, but we were not the types to own outdoor cats. For one, we lived way too close to the busy highway. And two, it was heartbreaking if the cat never came home. So we only kept indoor cats and provided them with as much enrichment as possible. As such, because we also had a decent mouse problem, the cats were allowed to hunt in the basement if they so chose, and Murray was the best mouser I'd ever seen to this day. He was a vocal cat, and he knew to tell us when he wanted to go downstairs in the basement, and was smart enough to know that the door was opened by pushing down the handle. When he wanted to come up, it wasn't uncommon that he would stand on his hind legs and grab the handle with his paws and attempt to pull it downward, though the handle was rather firm and take a little oomph to open. The basement door is in a small hall that also includes the door to the bathroom right next to it, with a pantry door next to that. This is where the story starts. It was probably around 2012 or 2013. I had a habit of staying up late, so it was around 3 a.m. I was sitting on the couch, which is not far from the little bathroom hall, when I started hearing the sound of the basement door shaking. I was a little agitated because clearly someone let Murray downstairs, and at the time, he and the other cat were being treated for fleas and worms, etc., which is the one time they're not supposed to go downstairs. He must have been down there for hours, because I was the only one awake since around 11 p.m. I get up to open the door and let Murray upstairs with a "Murray, who let you down there?" But just before grabbing the door handle to let him up, I heard him tell meow from just to my left. I turned around to see Murray sitting on the shelf across from the bathroom looking at the basement door rattling. This terrified me. But then it got worse. I turned back to the door because if it's not Murray, then who or what? We had another cat at the time named BB, but she had been on the couch when I got up, so it couldn't be her. Just then, the door handle starts rattling up and down, as if someone is trying to open it, but just can't get it to open. And after a moment, starts shaking more violently, as if whatever it was getting frustrated at the door not opening. At this point, I was done. I put a wooden chair in front of the door, grabbed my cat, and went to bed. The rattling stopped about a minute after I left, and I had to explain to my mom why I had put the chair there. I like to think I'm a skeptical believer in the paranormal. I like to exhaust any reason it's not a haunting before defaulting to a haunting. Had the door only rattled and shook, I would have just said it was a draft or some nice trying to wriggle under the door or something. But the sturdy handle jiggling made me nope out. I can't explain that. And I was too afraid to open the door and see what was on the other side. My dad didn't help when I told him what happened. The door handle doesn't work that way. Pushing it down on one side doesn't push it down on the other. If you saw it was moving on your side of the door. Thanks, Dad. I hate it. So instead of a spookable in the basement with the door safely between us, it's a spookable up here with me that wants to go down there. I had hoped the story would be over, but my mum apparently experienced this too a few months later. The next time it happened, I was in a bedroom across from the little hall, and Murray changed his perch to the end table next to my bed to watch the door do its shenanigans at night. Last year, Murray got sick. He got better, but never fully recovered because of just how old he was. He lost a lot of muscle and was running on one kidney and just didn't have it in him to mouse hunt anymore. Me and him got really close while he was sick. I wish we had bonded like that earlier in his life and had more time like that. He was a very independent cat, and I guess he just chose me as his companion for the end of his life. Inevitably, his other kidney gave out, and losing him was extremely hard. The vet gave him back to us in a little brown urn that we decided to put on the shelf in the hall where he used to perch before getting sick. This last year, my family was looking to buy this little farmhouse and fix it up. They didn't want to sell the old house, so my sisters moved in to look at the place. A bit before moving, I was in the kitchen when the door started rattling again. I then hear a loud bam and scoot over there to see what happened. My mom, brother, and younger sister were already there, and they were watching the door jiggle. I asked them what the loud noise was, and my sister said it just shot off the shelf and hit the pantry door. And I look in the direction to see Murray's urn on the floor in front of the pantry. Of all the bric-a-brac on that shelf, the only thing that flew off was Murray's urn. Honestly, I saw red, and this was the only time I have ever acknowledged whatever this was. And while my mom scrambled to collect Murray, I just screamed at the door, "Leave him alone! He's already gone!" The door rattle kept going for a few more minutes before stopping. Mom put Murray's remains on the mantel by the pellet stove instead. I live up at the farm now most days of the week, and to be honest, it's quiet there. There's only been one supernatural occurrence here, and it wasn't a big deal. And Murray's urn sits in the kitchen next to my mom's dog urn. So about 15 years ago, I had an encounter with what I assumed was something paranormal. My family and I would have a cool thing we did called movie night. We would set up the living room with blankets and pillows as a giant makeshift bed. We would go over to Blockbuster to rent a few movies and grab snacks. We'll fast forward to the end of this night. I'm the only one up. My entire family is sleeping in the living room. To this day, I don't know what it was, but I decided to get up and go into my parents' bedroom. I went onto their bed and tried to sleep, completely alone. Then, a strange sequence of events happened within 10 seconds. The air around me grew extremely cold, so much so it gave me a rush of anxiety. I heard a whisper from something, as if it's right now in my ear. I do not remember the words. Then, someone grabbed my right hand and pulled it slightly. I felt the fingers as they grasped and pulled. I jumped up and ran to the living room where my family slept. I didn't scream. Maybe I was too scared, and I didn't wake my family up because I just wanted to sleep. The craziest part of this story is I had no clue what signs of paranormal activity were. Like a week ago, me and my girlfriend got home from thrift shopping, and we were in our kitchen just putting down our bags. Casually talking with her, I feel someone coming through us and going out the kitchen door into the living room. I live with my nephew, so my brain immediately thinks it's him trying to make sense of it, but he's not home. I feel this weird haze and dizziness, and I faintly see the back top of someone's torso, with a blue Hawaiian shirt and blondish to white shoulder-length hair, just rushing into the living room. I felt confused, because I've never seen or felt anything like this, and I'm in my 30s. I let my girlfriend know, and she talks to him, saying that if he's going to be around, be nice. She believes in these things more than me, and has had some experiences before. I kind of just trip out and laugh it off. A few days later, we're in our room and about to watch a movie, when out of nowhere, she moves on the bed, and there's a random pile of beach sand there. We had made the bed before and eaten there without seeing this. We track back and think how it could have gotten there, and we have no idea. We had been to the beach like a month ago, but had done laundry and put away everything we used. Now today, we're sitting in our living room scrolling through our phones, and all of a sudden, we hear some keys fall in our kitchen. My girlfriend jumps up to go to the room because she doesn't have any pants on, and we again think it's my nephew coming in. I go check, and my keys are on the floor with my sunglasses. They were on a hook on the wall with a carabiner, and now they lay on the floor. We grab them, put them back, and kind of fling them around, push them, and they're not falling from that hook. Weird. So like I said, I'm a skeptic and don't believe in paranormal things, but ever since we went to that antique shop and brought back some stuff, these unexplainable things have been happening. I'm trying to find logic in the physics to them, but they're kind of not making sense. I'm not scared, just intrigued, and there must be an explanation, but it's definitely boggling my mind a bit. I grew up in Northern California, Santa Rosa to be specific. We lived in a very small row of pretty cheap houses in the middle of a growing industrial estate. Not being terribly close to many shops, and not having an overabundance of kids my own age to play with, I rode my bike quite a bit. I used to spend a fair amount of time riding my bike down to the Sonoma County Airport and then back to our own street. It was on one of these treks as a 9-year-old that I saw something that I still can't explain. It looked, for lack of any better description, like a golden oval at a slight angle. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't touching the ground. I could see space underneath it. It didn't particularly make any noise, rather the opposite. I noticed the closer it got, the less I could hear anything around me. Again, we were in the middle of a busy industrial district with a cement factory and gunstock manufacture plant within 2 blocks. However, the closer the object came, the more oppressive the silence became. It was spinning and moving about the same speed as a car as it came towards me. It paused at the stop and then turned to the left down the intersecting road. Again, it just looked like a golden oval that seemed to be muting everything in its vicinity. My lizard brain told me to get away from it, and I pleaded with all my might back towards my house. It continued down the road until it was out of sight. At the time, my best guess was it was some kind of angel. I had read that they might look like wheels, and it seemed like the best fit. Since then, I've read a lot about other people's encounters with the unknown, but I've never seen anything quite matching what I saw. When I first moved into my boyfriend's house, he told me his former roommates adamantly maintained that the house was haunted. They'd both seen and heard multiple inexplicable instances while living there. When I first moved in about a year ago, I definitely noticed a presence in the house for sure. There were 3 major incidents that confirmed the haunting for me. The first night was when my boyfriend was at work, 3rd shift, so I was home alone from about 11 p.m. to 5 or 6 a.m. Just me and the cat, who was a little wary of me at first, but was happy to have someone to let him in and out at his leisure. One night, at around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was watching Netflix and paused because I kept hearing an odd sound. I thought at first it might be the cat coughing up a hairball. It almost sounded like that, but there was something just off about it. I went into the room the sound seemed to be coming from. The cat has a tendency to slink under the couch when he's feeling particularly unsociable, so I knelt to see if he was ensconced down there. I couldn't see, so I got up and turned the light on. Immediately, the weird wheeze, rasp, and cough stopped. At that point, I saw the cat wedged between the TV stand and the wall on the other side of the room, and looking absolutely terrified. I scooped him up and brought him to the other room, where he stayed glued to my side for the rest of the night. The second incident was not my sighting, but my boyfriend's. He was coming home from work and pulling up to the front of the house. As he was pulling up to the sidewalk, he claimed that he saw a woman on his front step. She was wearing a long white gown and had flowing black hair. Most disconcerting of all, she was looking straight at him, he said. Our next door neighbour's cherry tree passed between them as he drove past it, and she was suddenly gone. He came in the door and looked extremely disconcerted. Were you just outside? He asked. I had been running around trying to get ready to leave for work, having just gotten dressed in clothes that were decidedly not a long white gown. The final incident was really more a weird series of events. My boyfriend and I were both seeing what we thought was our cat out of the corner of our eye, only to discover him in a completely different room or a spot he couldn't possibly have gotten to so quickly from where we thought we saw him. Another odd occurrence was once, just out of morbid curiosity, I left my laptop camera recording when my boyfriend and I went to the grocery store. Upon getting back and reviewing it, there was only one sound that didn't seem like traffic or cat sounds. It was a brief, rumbling little growl. There was also a number of times when our cat went missing only to turn up trapped in the basement. We always make a point of leaving the door open if he follows us in there, which is why this stood out to us so much. We would get home from the store or whatever and find the door closed. and the poor furry fella meowing pitifully to be let out. After that, there was sort of a dormant period, for lack of a better description. We didn't see or hear anything especially strange. However, in the past couple of weeks, my boyfriend and I have both begun seeing something out of the corner of our eyes again. Yesterday, when I was painting in our sunroom, I looked down to see my water cup sliding across the wooden shelf of my easel. I had brought my laptop in and set it in an empty chair to have some background noise. Once when I looked up, I saw the cursor moving across the screen just out of reach and while I was completely alone in the house. Has anyone else ever lived somewhere that went through phases of dormancy and then seemed to reactivate itself? Both my boyfriend and I have noticed a lot more strange noises in the house. We generally assume it's the cat initially, but there's been more than one instance of inexplicable knockings or tappings, etc., when our cat is curled up within sight. Now, the house is quite old, having been built in 1910, so we of course account for the usual creaks and stuff, especially with our old gas heating system and most of the main floor being wood. However, too many times, we've been sitting watching something in the living room and heard either what sounds like someone running up from the basement or somebody in another room shuffling things around. A couple of weeks ago, my boyfriend and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner. I was at the sink, washing off some of the spoons we'd been using, and my boyfriend was at the stove, decidedly out of reach. We were chatting about our days when I felt a tap on the middle of my back. Think of someone sitting behind you, trying to get your attention. It was that sort of touch. I also felt my hoodie get tugged on. I assumed my boyfriend was being silly and asked him what was up. He was very confused and asked what I meant. I said, "You poked me. Did you need to get the sink or something?" I glanced back towards him and he was at the stove looking at me, very perplexed. He was very adamant that he hadn't touched me. His theory was the entity was trying to go back down to the basement, and we were in the way. His old roommates who lived with him for a couple years both had seen or heard an entity come down the steps from upstairs and walk into the kitchen, or vice versa. The second incident happened a couple of nights ago. I'm a very hot sleeper, so I usually just have a light blanket wrapped around over my middle, with my feet out, so I don't overheat. On Saturday night, I was woken up by the need to go to the bathroom. While I was lying in bed and letting my eyes adjust to the dark room, I felt something grab my foot. It felt like a playful gesture, but it still absolutely scared the hell out of me. I didn't end up going back to sleep that night, but nothing else happened. Nine years ago, I was 13 years old. I used to live in this house where I experienced quite a few paranormal experiences, or at least things I couldn't explain rationally. One Sunday morning, my family and I were getting ready to go to church. The only people that were home at the time were me, Mom, 3 brothers, and my brother's girlfriend. Anyways, when I had finished putting on my clothes, I was walking towards the kitchen while putting on my belt. I wasn't watching where I was going because I already know where my kitchen is. So I was facing down towards my belt, putting it on, and as I entered the kitchen, in the corner of my eye, I saw a little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, sitting on the top of the stove, and she's slowly swinging her legs, looking down, with her hands at her sides, holding herself up. She's wearing jean overalls with white long sleeves and white knee socks. She had black hair down to her shoulders and lots of colourful hair ties in it. I was able to capture these details in a 1 or 2 second time frame. I completely ignored it and I kept walking and acted like I didn't even notice it and continued to make my cereal. I made my way back to the living room where everyone but my mom was. She was in her room getting ready. From the living room, you can see our balcony and we have a sliding screen door with no blinds because we're too lazy to buy some. Anyways, we were just watching TV and my brother's girlfriend goes, "Is that your cousin on the balcony?" I didn't know she was visiting. My cousin lives in another state and never visited during this time frame. I told her she's in another state, and why would she visit during this time alone, without parents? Because she was also 3 or 4 years old at the time. I asked her to describe what the girl looked like, and she described the same girl I had seen in my kitchen. I still get chills about it to this day. To begin with, I should explain some basic personal history. I have a family of 5 plus 2 spouses. My parents, my 2 brothers, my oldest brother's wife, and mine. Before getting married and moving out with my wife, I lived in the same house for 19 years. My parents bought it when I was like 6 months old, and I got married during college, so I only ever known that house and my current apartment. I had some traumatic experiences when I was very young that were tied to one of the rooms in my parents' house. And then a few years later, my parents had me move into that room. During my time in that room, I started having vicious nightmares, all involving me watching helplessly as the people I loved were brutally murdered in graphic and creative ways, in which one constant fixture was a figure that seemed to be observing everything and watching me from a distance, never directly interacting with the chaos, but always on the edge of my vision. The figure always looked the same, a tall mass of complete blackness with the exception of an antlered animal skull where its head would be. Anyways, when I went to college, the nightmares stopped completely. I didn't have a single one until I came home for winter break and stayed in that room again. During that break, my then fiancée stayed a few nights at my house with me. We slept in separate rooms, but both on the same floor. During the night, she texted me that she was having a panic attack and that she thought she was seeing a figure. When I asked what it looked like, she described the figure from my dreams exactly, and I told her to start reading Psalms in the hopes that it might help. She immediately felt better, and we talked for a while about it before deciding to keep an eye out for more spooky shit. That night, I had the worst nightmares of my life. The next morning, I felt numb and out of commission, and I didn't recover until the next day. Every time I've gone back to that house since, I felt an overwhelming malicious presence there. It has the effect of weighing down on everything. Kind of feels like having cotton in your ears and making everything feel super depressing. Recently, there was another development. My grandfather passed away this last semester, and my grandmother moved into the house with my parents. She's a troubled person, and she brought a lot of toxicity and conflict into the house. Last time I was there with my wife, we immediately felt something horrifyingly evil. I've always had a sensitivity to spiritual things, and it was like nothing I've felt before. I think I was feeding off of the conflict in the house and making things worse. My cat, who we'd brought with us, immediately slipped into what looked like a super depressive state. She wouldn't play or do anything, no matter how hard we tried. The kicker was this. That time I decided to try something. I walked into my old room, the one tied to my traumatic experiences, and tried to feel for any sort of extra bad energy. It was tangible. My mum and I repainted that room the last time I was down there, and it felt very cathartic, but the power was still there. On an instinct, I touched the wall in the room and immediately had violent visions reliving my trauma. Except the spirit was there, watching and seemingly gloating. It felt like it was trying to rub what happened in my face, like a look what I'm capable of sort of thing. My wife told me that I went white as a sheet and started shaking and crying, but I don't remember it. I'm relatively certain that the presence in my childhood home is evil, even demonic. I've talked to my mom, and I get the sense that she doesn't really believe me, but my wife and I are pretty sure of it. I may talk to my brothers about it when I see them again. We're all going back to the house for Thanksgiving in the next week or so I'll find out soon. My boyfriend, his dog, and I had just moved into our first place together. It was a duplex house, and we lived upstairs in a 1-bedroom unit. We had barely lived there a month when my boyfriend got a new job. His new job had him working third shift. He would leave at 11:30 p.m. each night and not return home until 8:30 a.m. Prior to this, I had never spent a night alone before. I grew up in a multi-generational household, so I always had someone in the house with me. I didn't think it would be an issue though. I've never been afraid of the dark, loved scary movies, and haunted houses. The first few weeks were uneventful. My boyfriend would leave while I was asleep, and he'd return as I was getting ready to go to my job. Then one night, I was woken up and I felt scared. Really, really scared. I felt like something was standing outside my bedroom door. I looked over and saw my boyfriend was gone already. I tried to move, but I was frozen. I was unable to roll over to look at the bedroom door. I sensed that someone had entered the room with me, but I hadn't heard the door open. Our dog, who slept in the living room, was going crazy, snarling and barking. Hearing my dog go crazy scared me even more. I began to panic more as I heard something banging on the bedroom door, and then silence again. I don't know how long I stayed like that, minutes or hours. I eventually was able to move again. I lunged for the bedroom light and stared at the door. I grabbed a metal bat and flung the door open. Nothing. My dog was on the sofa and he was calm. I must have imagined it all. I laughed at myself. I was being ridiculous. I didn't tell my boyfriend about it. I figured it was a one-time occurrence. I was wrong. Every night, when my boyfriend left, the same thing happened. I would be frozen with fear as I felt something outside the bedroom door. I would hear my dog go crazy in the living room. I read online that it was sleep paralysis. It was all imaginary, okay. I had nothing to fear. I read on an online forum that the best thing to do was to relax and let your body go limp. I tried it and it worked. I'd become unstuck and run for the light. The nightmare would end. The issue was, it started to come into the room and get closer and closer to me. It became harder for me to relax through the mounting fear and panic. It was pure hell. I was terrified it was going to eventually reach me. I finally told my boyfriend I was having nightmares and asked him to please let our dog into the room before we left. I didn't tell him how bad the dreams were. I just said, please don't forget. Please don't leave me alone in the dark. He started letting my dog in with me. The nightmare would start and my dog would be next to me and start as barking and growling. The comfort of having a dog allowed me to get unfrozen immediately when the nightmare started. The thing wouldn't get past the door before I turned on the lights. I felt so much better. Then one night, my boyfriend woke up late and forgot to let our dog into the room with me. The nightmare started and I was alone. Realizing I was completely alone, I panicked horribly. The thing came into the room and I was frozen. I closed my eyes trying to relax, but I couldn't. It got closer and closer until it was right next to me. Suddenly, my dog burst through the door, snarling and barking. I was able to shoot out of bed and run out of the house with my dog. My mom lived 2 miles away. I walked with my dog at 1 a.m. all the way to her house. My dog and I went to sleep there every night after that. My boyfriend said we should move and see if that helped me. He got his cousin and girlfriend to move in and take over our lease. In our new place, I no longer had sleep paralysis. I was so relieved. Months later, his cousin told my boyfriend that when his girlfriend goes out of town and he has to sleep alone at home, he has a scary dream where something is trying to get into the room with him. He dared his friend to sleep there alone, and the same thing happened to his friend. They made their whole friend group try it. All of them said they felt a presence. My boyfriend's cousin still lives there, but the cousin has forbidden his girlfriend from leaving him alone overnight. I was 6 years old and I lived with my grandparents. I remember being a bit of a baby about sleeping in my own bed, but both my grandparents were out of town, so they told me earlier in the day to sleep in my bed. And if I needed anything, I need to go tell my uncle, who lived there, if any problems arose. Well, I got put to bed early. I'm not exactly sure the time, but it was before sundown. I still remember being frightened by having any door closed, so as a kid, I used to demand that if I was in a room, I had the doors opened. so I could see if anything was coming at me. Anyways, I awoke at night and I remember being terrified. I flipped over and looked down the pitch black hallway, staring, just waiting for something to come out. I wanted to scream for my uncle, but I got in plenty of trouble for bothering him in the past. So I just sat there horrified that some monster would come out. I remember laying on my right side, looking down the hallway. I blinked once and opened my eyes to see a translucent figure in the hallway. After confirming what I saw with my eyes, I froze in terror, trying not to scream, because I didn't want this figure to see me. Just as I gained a bit of composure, as best as a 6-year-old could, the figure turned to me where I could make out more of its figure. It was a woman, most likely in her early 20s. She had a longer bob haircut, donning a spaghetti-strap dress that expanded out at the bottom, just right above the knees, with a very slender outline. Still, I couldn't make out the colour or intricate details. All I knew was she was translucent, with the only colour I could make out was white, as if she was a cloud formed to a human outlining. After I caught most of her details, she lifted her arm in a very gentle manner and did a bit of a long wave goodbye towards me and descended down the stairs at the very edge of the hallway. I remember getting up and turning on the lights and screaming for my uncle, who had a room downstairs from me. He never came upstairs to check it out. I remember getting so worked up but so fearful to leave my room, I just crawled onto my bed and fell asleep. When I was in my early teens, I had a younger cousin come visit my parents' apartment to play video games. During his visit, it was only me, him and my father. Our layout of the apartment is railroad style. Parents' bedroom in the back, followed by mine, bathroom, kitchen, then living room. As my cousin and I were playing video games, I mentioned to him if he was hungry, because I was going to the kitchen to fetch us some type of snacks. So I walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door, squat down and start looking for some munchies. No longer than a few seconds after that, I just happened to look up as my father walks by and stares down at me with a look of disgust on his face, then continues to walk into the living room. I said to myself, what's up with that dirty look? I laugh a bit as I'm shaking my head, standing up, and just as I'm turning to walk into the living room, I say out loud, what's your problem? But there was nobody there. Nothing. Just an empty living room, and I'm standing there with a confused look on my face. Did my imagination play a trick on me? I literally just saw him give me this nasty look, and now there's nobody in the living room. I went back to my bedroom and asked my cousin if he had seen my father walk by, to which he replied no, and that kind of freaked him out a bit. So I went to my parents' bedroom, and there was my father. He was folding his clothes, and when I asked him if he had just walked by me to the living room, he told me that he was in the room the entire time. Then I said, hey, you changed your clothes. And he replied back to me saying that he'd been wearing his current clothes all day. We'll mark this one up as strange, because I have no explanation for it. In my teen years, I'm in my 40s now, I was always home alone watching TV in my parents' living room. While channel surfing with the old cable remote, I saw that a good movie was about to air on HBO. Excited about the prospect of watching something good on a boring Saturday evening was going to be the highlight of my night. At that time, we had a set-top cable box that when you turned it on, you had to manually turn on the TV right after on those old boob tube televisions. I'm in the living room with the lights on, sitting comfortably on a beach chair, when all of a sudden, the TV turns off. Huh? That was odd. No big deal, so I reached in front of me, grabbed the TV remote and turned it back on, then placed the remote back on the coffee table. I sit back, get comfortable, then about 15 minutes later, it turns off again. Annoyed, I pick up the remote and turn the TV back on again. I'm mostly pissed off at this point because I hate being disrupted as I'm watching something good on TV. Then a few moments later, it turns off again. Logically, I'm thinking that maybe somebody is playing a prank on me. And that has happened to me in the past, where my cousins would prank call me or do something mischievous. Then I ruled that out because I was the only person in the apartment. Then I thought that it could be interface from both remotes being in close proximity to one another, but that's never happened before. Maybe the next door neighbour was using the same remote and somehow turned off mine, but the apartment walls are made of thick concrete. I was just ruling out every known possibility I could think of as to why this was happening. At this point, I say out loud, "No, this is unacceptable. I refuse to be interrupted." So I turn the TV back on, and now it immediately shuts off. I'm playing a tug of war here, almost as if I'm playing a video game. On, off, on, off, on, off. As fast as I'm clicking the on button, it's turning right off. This goes on for several more minutes. At this point, I get up, walk up to the side of the TV, and give it a whack on the side. Because that's what we did with 90s technology. I'm just sitting in the living room, fighting with some unknown force over control of the TV. Then finally, it stops, and I presume to watch my TV program. I don't know what this unknown thing was trying to prove, to fuck with me, but I wasn't backing down. After that night, this strange experience never happened again. I'm from the UK, and although I believe in spirits and the paranormal, I'm very much of the opinion that ignorance is bliss. I don't want to know, and would rather make any logical excuse than believe it's something creepy. That said, I've had a few experiences that I can't explain away. Here's one of them. My friend Chloe and I lived together during our early 20s in London. I'd spent a decent amount of time with Chloe's little brother, Charlie, her dad, and dad's girlfriend. So when they invited me for a long weekend in France with some of their friends, it was a definite yes. My friend's dad had bought a chateau near Normandy a few years previously. He's great with interiors and had been renovating it since he first bought it. He had made the bedrooms and downstairs livable so that everyone could make the most of it, despite it being a work of progress. The chateau and its grounds are pretty vast. It has 12 bedrooms and sits at the end of a long gated driveway on a few acres of land. It certainly looked imposing when we pulled up, and I suppose on a wintry day it could have looked ominous, but in the golden autumn light, I didn't get any bad vibes. It was my first visit, so I was given the grand tour on arrival. Chloe's dad took me from room to room, talking me through his renovation plans, opening all the shutters as we went, revealing windowsills and floors strewn with dead flies. This is a pretty common occurrence in old buildings in that region, so nothing to worry about, but it added to that old building feel, with all the heavy drapes, wood panels, and antique furniture. It felt like we had arrived and disturbed the peace, but that feeling was short-lived, as we threw open the shutters and let the sunlight warm up the house. Our bedroom was next to Chloe's dad's. It was light and airy, with twin beds separated by a dresser. Between the furthest bed and the window, a door led into an empty bathroom. It was untouched so far and had bare floorboards, faded walls, and the fittings were years old and not plumbed in. Chloe's dad navigated the rotten floorboards and told us about his plans for the ensuite. Through a hole in the floor, we could see into an old barn extension which he planned to eventually make into a games room. After the house tour, we drove to a supermarket and stocked up on food and drink for the weekend. We then spent the afternoon in the sunshine entertaining Charlie, whilst the older couples caught up. With a dinner party planned for the next evening, we decided to get an early night. I ended up in the bed nearest the bathroom door and window. This wouldn't have been my first choice, but it was Chloe's trip with her family. I curled up and conked out. What felt like hours later, I heard Chloe whispering and giggling under her breath into my left ear. I didn't respond and rolled away from her, thinking whatever the joke was, it could wait until the morning. As I was settling back to sleep, it happened again. This time my whole body prickled as I remembered my surroundings. Chloe was to my right, separated by a dresser. To my left was the bathroom door. What the fuck? I called out to Chloe, who was usually a heavy sleeper, and she was already half awake, as she thought she had heard whispering and thought that I was on the phone or something. We pushed an armchair in front of the empty bathroom door for all the good that could possibly do. Then we moved our beds together. As spooked as I was, I didn't feel a great sense of foreboding. Whatever it was seemed to be teasing rather than deeply sinister. Eventually, we fell back asleep. The next day, we mentioned it to her dad, who laughed it off, and that was that. Later that day, at the dinner party, not sure if it was down to the free-flowing champagne or the bad juju in the house, but there were lots of arguments that night. However, no more whispers, so we had a good night's sleep and forgot all about the previous night. Fast forward to our last day. Chloe's dad and co decided to walk to the nearest village for a drink. We decided to stay behind and get ready for dinner. I went and hopped in the shower upstairs whilst Chloe had a fag outside. The bathroom door has a glass panel and the shower screen is all glass. As I was sitting up in the shower, I had a horrible and overwhelming sense that someone was behind me. Had the shower had a curtain, I would not have had the guts to pull it back and take a look. That's how strong the feeling was, there was something there. I took a deep breath and turned to look towards the door. As I did, a shadow passed as if someone had been walking along the corridor. I was trying to think logically and calm myself down, but internally, I was losing my shit. So I called out, "Chloe?" No answer. Grabbed my towel, grabbed my phone, called Chloe's mobile. She was locking up downstairs. She thought it was safest to lock up if we were both upstairs with hairdryers on. I'd prefer to have been locked outside rather than inside. Chloe came running upstairs as I was running across the landing, and we flew into our bedroom, slamming the door. I calmly explained what I had seen and felt, and she started freaking out, begging me to admit that I was winding her up. I was not. At this point, we were holding each other and becoming more and more hysterical. Then we heard a clatter against the window. We screamed. We were 25 years old, not preteens watching a horror film, but we were unleashing fully dramatic, terrified screams. We held hands and looked out the window. Her dad was there throwing stones because he was locked out. They'd walked up to the village and the bar was closed, so they'd come straight back to find that Chloe had locked the back doors. I was so relieved that we weren't alone anymore and felt instantly better. We went home the next day without any further drama, so I hope it was our minds playing tricks on us. Despite an open invite to go back whenever we like, we've not been. We've floated the idea of going back with our boyfriends in a larger group, but we've always found a reason to go elsewhere. I used to work in a residential care home. The care home had capacity for around 30 residents, set over 4 floors. At the time of my experience, the upstairs was being renovated to add capacity, so some rooms were empty. I never worked night shifts, only late shifts which finished around 9:30 p.m. During winter, it becomes dark early, around 4:30 p.m. The late shift feels lonelier when it's dark and the managers, kitchen staff and extra carers leave at around 6 p.m. 3 carers would stay, 1 to do meds, 1 to do baths, and 1 to do the tea trolley and bedtime assistance. This particular day felt unsettled. The weather had been so miserable, and it was dark and grey all day, with thunder and lightning setting in later on. Most of the residents went back to their rooms straight after dinner, instead of sitting in the lounge like usual. That night, I was doing the tea trolley and bedtime assistance. I was set up in the kitchen and split off from the other girls. They went to the other end of the house. I was knocking on the rooms, delivering tea and biscuits, and having a little chat as I went alone. A little while into the tea round, an assistant's buzzer went off in the upstairs room, so I parked the trolley and ran up. The resident was complaining that someone had closed their door. Closing the doors required someone to remove the kickstop, which is pretty stiff. I assumed that this resident had been pottering around and set it off. I reset it, checked he was happy, and nipped back down to where I'd left the trolley. It was gone. Thinking one of the other girls had finished their rota unusually quickly and had picked up the trolley, I went to answer another buzzer. I popped my head around the corner to explain that I'd surely help this resident into bed. And this lovely lady was sitting there, blocked into her armchair by the tea trolley, helping herself to biscuits, saying that the lady with black hair whizzed it in and left it there. Everyone present that night was blonde, grey, or bald. No one had black hair. The residents on that particular floor all had very limited mobility and used walkers. I couldn't think of a single resident who could have moved the trolley, and the staff wouldn't have due to safety risks. I finished the tea round, bumped into the other girls, and told them about it. We all agreed it was strange. I finished the tea and went upstairs to help a lady, May, into bed. May had dementia and would often talk a little bit incoherently. I was smiling and chatting with her, popping her pajamas on and pulling down the bed. Then May took her teeth out, pulled a really strange expression and said, "She's watching you. The little girl. Behind you." All the while staring over my shoulder into the dark corner of the room. I have experience with dementia patients and didn't show that this had flustered me and carried on putting her into bed without turning around. May carried on. "She knows all about you. She's moved my chair. She's watching you." And then she laughed and laughed as if they were in on a joke. I didn't turn to look in the direction of May's chair and carried on getting her comfortable. I left the room without glancing back in the direction that May was staring in. Every hair on my body stood on end, but I shook it off and carried on with my shift. The next hour was uneventful. A few residents popped their heads out and asked if everything was okay, as they'd heard footsteps running around. I said it was probably us just going back and forth. Finally, at 9 p.m, I sat down with the other girls, and we had a bit of a joke about how weird the shift had been. With that, a buzzer went off, and we glanced up to see which room it was. It wasn't a number we recognised. You get to know every room number attached to each resident. We looked at each other a little confused. My colleague ran into the office, consulted the floor plan and said, "It's a top floor bathroom. Isn't that being renovated? I didn't even think that was wired in. Is anyone up there?" Two of us went up together, in case someone had gone wandering. Unlikely, as the residents in that part of the house needed support mobilising and the new rooms were empty. We had goosebumps as we walked up the stairs. The beep, beep, beep of the buzzer felt like it was counting our steps. The hall lights were on dimly, but we couldn't see any light coming from under the bathroom door. The unfilled rooms along the corridor seemed really dark and empty. I pushed the door open and pulled the light switch. My stomach flipped. In the middle of the totally empty bathroom was May's chair. We turned the buzzer off and went downstairs to finish our shift. All of us felt quite shaken and were glad to clock off when the night staff arrived. To this day, we have no explanation. The residents at the time wouldn't have been physically able to pull off these pranks, and there were no visitors on the premises that evening. This happened last year, and lately it's been on my mind a lot, and I wanted to share it. So one day last year, my fiancé Michael and I were attempting to fix my car. The plastic shield on the bottom of the car had come loose and was dragging on the ground. So we're in his dad's driveway and have the front tyres of the car up on ramps. We crawled under the car with some zip ties to see if we could fix this plastic thing. Now this is important to remember. Both Michael and I are fat. And not just fat, but physically out of shape. It took a lot of time and effort for us to get on the ground and shimmy under the car. While we're under the car trying to figure out where to zip tie this thing, we hear tyres screeching. Then all these loud bangs and booms. Obviously a pretty bad car wreck. But the sounds didn't stop. They kept getting closer and closer. Michael was lying to my right where the sounds were coming from. He looks over and then turns back to me and yells, "Get out!" And then he's gone. He just disappeared. The next thing I know, I'm standing next to the car that I was just under and made eye contact with the lady that was driving. At this point, time slowed down. I remember her eyes wide with surprise when she saw me and then swerved away from me. I remember running away to get further away from her, but I was never directly in the path of the car. In fact, I remember being scared when she swerved away from me that she might turn and hit Michael, because I had no idea where he was. Michael ended up far away from the car on the other side. It turns out the lady had lost control of the car while making a turn too fast and then panicked and kept accelerating. She totaled the first car she hit, which was the neighbours next door, then hit her pickup, crashed through the fence between the houses, hit my car, and finally Michael's dad's SUV. She was still accelerating when her bumper got caught on the SUV bumper. It was what stopped her from going into the house. Michael and I didn't have a scratch. Nothing. Not even a bruise or any sores or aches. But Michael and I aren't fit or in shape. There was no way we could have gotten out in time because when Michael said he saw the car coming, it was already through the fence. That's only maybe 20 feet from the car we were under, and that lady was flying. We talked about it later. We both realized we remember everything about that accident vividly. Every detail. Except getting out from under the car. No memory of turning, scooting, rolling, nothing. 1 second we're under the car, and next we're out, in completely different spots. I wasn't even out of breath. In fact, I was completely calm through the whole thing. But if we rolled or scooted out from the car as fast as we needed to, we should have definitely had some scrapes at least. And maybe a little bit sore from moving faster than we have ever physically moved. But we were fine. And no memory of getting out. I think someone or something moved us. Or maybe we did the first teleportation. It's because I've experienced brushes with the paranormal, something gets triggered. There's a common thread to these things through lines that ring clear as a bell to me. In 2007, I toured the eastern US in a punk band. We never stayed in hotels, as those were out of our budget. Instead, we spoke with people at our shows to find a house that wouldn't mind 4 dudes sleeping in their living room for a night. It was never comfortable, but it got us to the next day, and we made sure to be quiet, courteous, and gracious to our hosts. It was early April in Buffalo, New York. A young hipster couple told us that they had recently purchased a 12-bedroom house downtown. What anyone sane would call a mansion. They had only really moved into the kitchen, living room, and 1 bedroom. They picked out 2 rooms for us because they were closest to the kitchen and nearby bathroom, and I'm sure they didn't trust newly met strangers fumbling around in the dark nethers of a house they themselves were unfamiliar with. My guitarist Adam and I were put in a room to share. We slept on the floor, each with our own blanket and pillow. A red LED clock was plugged in on the floor for us as well. There were no curtains on the windows, and the room was illuminated by the orange glow of the sodium streetlights outside. I awoke to feeling my foot being pulled up about a foot above the floor. Upon opening my eyes, I saw, in the glow of the streetlights, a little girl holding my foot and smiling. I looked back at the clock, 2:38 a.m. I looked back at her, still smiling. I pulled my foot away. She put her finger on her lip and looked shy. Not taking my eyes off her, I began elbowing Adam. Adam, wake up! He's stirring, but not as well as I'd like to. I need to know his eyes are open. So I turned from her to him. He looks at me, confused and kind of pissed off. What? I point towards my feet and look. She's gone. Our door is still closed. The room has no closet. No furniture to hide behind. No shadows cast by anything. What? Adam is mad. I realise speaking any more about this right now isn't going to go anywhere good. Never mind. Adam rolls over in a huff and goes back to sleep. I lay there thinking it over. The couple never mentioned having children, but maybe they did. I tried to rationalise it. Okay, so they have this 8-year-old daughter, and they've just moved into an old mansion. There are still unpacked boxes in the place. Mom and Dad leave her home alone in this place to see some bands play a dive bar and invite one of the bands to stay with them. They don't mention the daughter to the band, or presumably the band to the daughter. And then she awakens and decides to explore this new giant house in the darkness. opens a door to a room that nobody was using, and finds two strange adult men sleeping on the floor. Then chooses to lift up one of their feet and smile at them like a creep until he wakes up. And the second he looks away from her, quickly and silently exits the room, closing the door behind her without so much as a click. That seems creepier than a ghost. That kept me up. The next morning, I see the couple and ask, "Hey, do y'all have a kid?" They respond with, "No, but we do have a dog, a husky." "Okay, well," I start, "but he won't go in that room you guys slept in." I left it at that. I explained what happened to Adam once we were back in the van. He said that it was totally a ghost. I had no idea that they could touch people. So in my town is an old house that has been abandoned and boarded up for a good 30 years. After the old tenant died and the council boarded the house up, seeing as she didn't have anyone to give it to, according to word from my dad. My dad says he remembers this woman as being mean and cranky, and as one who'd yell at kids for walking past, and in her later years would yank her curtain open and glare out. Today, I was walking down past the house to meet my stepdad after helping my mom with her Girl Guides group so she could drop me to the train station. I'll start by saying this. The wind was blowing at the side of me closest to the house. One board was broken about a month or two ago, leaving the house open to be seen into. So probably druggy, dumb teen squatter or homeless person. The window was also pretty deep, at least a foot inwards of its seeing, as it's one of the older houses in the town, so there would have been no modern heating systems. As I passed, I coughed slightly, and that's when it happened. Some unnameable force yanked the curtain. It wasn't one of those wind-blowing movements, especially because the window was that deep and the curtain was too far back. Also, the movement was completely wrong for it to be that. It wasn't swaying or fluttering. No, this was something different. Like an angry person tugging it aside. I didn't stop to see who or what it was, but I began to run. I wasn't stopping to see what was coming out of there. I didn't want to. I haven't run so hard in all my life. I stopped where I had met my stepdad and looked back up the path to realise to my horror that nobody was standing on the path or going in or out the house. Things in the house, I don't know who or what you are. But for the sake of everyone's good, let's not meet face to face. Just knowing you're there is enough for me. To start with, I've studied the paranormal on and off for over 50 years. What I'm writing about happened to both my wife and myself back in 2012. We lived in a mobile home at the time. From the time we moved in, my wife complained constantly about seeing the shadow of an old woman going from the kitchen to our bedroom, which was in the back of the trailer. I never saw the shadow the whole time we stayed there. We started hearing banging sounds in the laundry room, which was next to the kitchen. We only heard them at night. I found out that cats were under the trailer making the noise. I secured around the house of the trailer and the noises stopped. Those noises anyway. A few days later, I started hearing heavy walking outside our bedroom. I would get up and the noise would stop. I could find no reason for the noise. I looked outside for a cause and found nothing. Then, the flies started. We came home one day and found hundreds of flies around the inside of the window across from the kitchen. We sprayed and killed them, but the next day they'd be back. We fought this on and off all through the winter. During this time, my wife started telling me that she had the feeling like someone was watching her. One day, I had walked outside. My wife was still in the kitchen finishing up the dishes. Suddenly, she felt someone blow gently on the back of her neck. She screamed and ran to the door, but she pulled on it and it wouldn't open. Then she heard what sounded like an old woman giggling. She started pounding on the door and screaming for me. I was by the car and heard her. I ran and opened the door and she hugged me, breathing hard. She told me what happened, and we left to give her a chance to calm down. We came back, and our neighbour was standing outside. As we were talking to her, she told us we were not the first ones to experience this. Others that lived in that trailer experienced similar things. Also, she told us that an old woman that lived on the lot in a different trailer than the one we lived in. It was also farther back in the lot. She told us that the old woman died after her trailer caught on fire. She was burned up. After hearing this, we went into the trailer. I was a believer in Jesus Christ, so I declared his name loudly in the kitchen and told whatever entity to leave in the name of Jesus. After that, things seemed to calm down. For a while. A few weeks later, we came home and found hundreds of dead flies around the same window. Not knowing what to think, we cleaned them up and went on. A few days later, my wife was at work, and I had the day off. I decided to take a nap. Later that afternoon, I woke up and walked out to the living room and found the glass top of our coffee table shattered. Glass was all over the living room, like something had been violently thrown through it. There was no evidence of this under the coffee table, and there was nothing heavy on the coffee table that could have caused this. Stunned for a few seconds, I evoked the name of Jesus again. After that, nothing else happened. A few weeks later, we moved out.